Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube for the final installment of our favorite series, the Fixing Every Team in 5 minutes. We're going to the AFC and NFC South here today. Sam, how you doing?
Live, 5 minutes. A lot of air quotes in these series.
A lot of air quotes. And for those of you following, this is part 4 of 4. We're going team by team, division by division, fixing every team in 5 minutes. Realistically, it's closer to 15 to 20 minutes on every single team. Be sure to check out all the previous episodes. And much like yesterday's show, we're pre-recording this. We're pre-recording this before NFL Combine Week. If you're watching right now, Sam and I are live probably over at the NFL Scouting Combine. So, just keep that in mind in case a couple things have changed over the last couple days.
I mean, this is the most perilous show we've ever done, This is the longest amount of time between recording and it going out. Anything could change. Anything could make us look idiots more than we normally do. Risky.
Hold the news until Friday, NFL, if you can. All right, you ready to go?
Let's go.
All right, let's do it. We're going to start in the NFC South with the Tampa Bay Bucs. They've won 3 straight NFC South championships now, back-to-back with Baker Mayfield under center. So the Bucs trying to not just win the division, one of the weaker divisions in the NFL, but figure out a way to kind of get over that hump, win a couple playoff games and maybe make an even bigger run. Interesting times over in Tampa Bay. Not a ton of turnover, but a couple of your, veteran stalwarts over there in Tampa Bay. Chris Godwin, Levante David. David's a free agent again. We'll see if he ends up coming back to the. He's probably back by now already with the Bucs. Who knows? But yeah, let's discuss the Bucs, man. Where do you want to start?
It's funny because you said they're back-to-back champions of that division, and in both years they were not expected to be the division winner. Right, the year before it was the Saints. Everyone expected to win with Derek Carr. Derek Carr is good enough to win you the South. He should be the guy. And then last year, it was everyone expected the Falcons. Kirk Cousins. Cousins is good enough to win you that division immediately. As soon as they signed him, they were propelled into the bookies' favorites for that division. And yet each time it's been Baker Mayfield, the plucky Buccaneers, have found a way to win the division. Once they've made it to the playoffs, they've been, I don't want to say found out or exposed, but that's the level, right? This is a team that was good enough to win the division, but was never really good enough to contend against the true elites. And they've hit that wall. So, is this an offseason where they can find their way past that? Or is that just the sort of level that a Baker Mayfield type of quarterback brings you to?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's setting a good baseline, a good foundation here. Last year at this time, they had to make a decision about bringing back Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and figure out, are those guys who just got us into the final 8 teams in the NFL? Are they the two that are two of the big pieces that we're going to build around? They locked up Baker Mayfield. They lock up Mike Evans, trying to keep him as a buck for life, keep that 1,000-yard streak going. And they have similar questions now with Chris Godwin and Levante David. I think the roster's in pretty good shape. They've drafted well. I mentioned interesting times because they do lose assistant GM, or one of the assistant GMs. John Spytek becomes the general manager for the Raiders. He's a scout first type of guy, came up through the scouting ranks, and the Bucs have done a really nice job as far as replenishing talent from within. They've done a nice job as far as drafting and developing their own talent over the last few years. So I think from a needs perspective, they could always use a little bit more from a pass rush perspective. I think they tried to future-proof that with a second rounder in Chris Braswell last year. And, that they probably go back to that well. And they're also a team that seems to match that need with value pretty well in the draft. Remember a couple of years ago, they drafted Tristan Wirfs with a massive need at right tackle. He stepped right in. They needed a starting safety. They drafted Antoine Winfield. Last year, they needed a starting center. They drafted Graham Barton. So they're picking at number 19. And as I've said for other teams, it does feel like the edge rush, value kind of matches up with the need that the Bucs probably have there.
They've been a little bit like the Dallas Cowboys in recent years, where this is a team that doesn't mind needing to fill a need with their first-round draft pick in particular, right? They're happy enough to go into a draft having picked or having filled most of the holes or the needs on the roster. And if we've got one significant area where we need a player, we're okay targeting that guy with the first-round draft pick. And I think, as long as you continue to hit on those guys, that's fine. That becomes a problem where you miss on a guy, or the guy takes a while to develop, or, it doesn't hit the ground running in the NFL, and suddenly you've got a player that you're actually banking on just sort of taking some time to get to the level that you need him to be at.
Yeah, so I think we'll talk about free agency in a minute because I don't think they're going to do a ton in free agency. They have a lot of their too deep, or at least their starting group, looking pretty strong. I think they'll have that edge rush value. It mentioned James Pierce's fall a lot on the show. Mike Green. I think getting one of those guys opposite Yaya Diaby, because it's not just. So you have Anthony Nelson as a free agent. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka was the first rounder a couple years ago. He hasn't really panned out. I'd say subpar production. I don't think there's this hidden world where the Bucs love him and want to make sure that they retain him. So I'm expecting a couple replacements there. Braswell, who I mentioned last year. So it's Braswell and Diaby. Just get that pass rush, that elite pass rusher, that Mike Green, that James Pierce in the first round, and then they're working on getting Chris Godwin back here. They're trying to find a way to get him back, and they might be able to, steal that hometown discount just to keep Mike Evans, Chris Godwin coming off injury, and a Jalen McMillan together with the speed threat of Trey Palmer. It's a pretty nice, 3-4 punch there as far as receiver goes if they can keep Godwin.
I wonder what Godwin's market's going to be like, because that's a guy that's just battled so many injuries. When he's healthy, I think Chris Godwin is a really, really good wide receiver that can play inside and outside, that makes probably every receiving core in the NFL better. Like, if you got a healthy Chris Godwin, I can't think off the top of my head if there's a single receiving core that he would not upgrade by being on it, say in the top 3 of the depth chart. So if you could get him around, it's obviously a huge thing, but the injuries have been such a big issue now, and such a continual kind of long list of season-ending things that we don't even know where he's going to get to when he's able to come back. So it's curious what his marketplace is going to be like. The other interesting thing is, when this show goes out later today, will be the first of the defensive lineman workouts. So we might not be talking about a James Pierce slide anymore. We might be talking about James Pierce Jr. soaring up draft boards off the back of an absurd 40 time, or a leaping out of the building.
Of all the positions, obviously receivers, they can make a move once they run in the 4.2s or 4.3s, but we know defensive linemen, you get the broad, you get the cone, you get that 40 time, you get the 10-yard split. That does help some of those defensive linemen vault, especially some of those big boys, right? The Deion Walkers of the world, the Kenneth Grants of the world. Yeah, we might be hyping them up in the next couple days here, as after you're seeing this. So yeah, I think defensive line depth overall for the Bucs. Drink. How many times have I said that? Add more defensive line depth for you guys. But I think edge does make a lot of sense there. I do think it also makes sense to bring back Godwin. The other need, so to speak, would be the starting left guard position. And that's where Tyler Booker value is also similar. Alabama guard, that is, middle to the late first round is where he's potentially projected. If you do want to get your guard maybe later, I kind of like a guy like Tate Rutledge from Georgia, who's currently in the 80s on the consensus board, which matches up where the Bucs are picking in the third round. So as far as the need and value matching up, I do think this is a pretty good draft for the Bucs to get a good edge rusher, to potentially get that starting guard in round 2 or 3 and fill some of those holes, immediate needs on the roster.
Yeah, and they could be a team that's willing to, again, they've had not a tendency, but they've had a willingness to take these college players or college linemen that were, tackles, and move them inside, that kind of thing. So maybe they would be in the market for another one of those first round draft picks that they would pitch inside to guard, who had been a tackle, whether it's a guy like Banks sliding, or whether it's, one of these other college tackles that they could project inside. That would be a potential option as well for them.
The other spot that we were looking at last year at this time, remember they had Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis as a 1-2 punch for quite a while. Carlton Davis, they traded him. We didn't know what cornerback 2 was going to look like, but you get that breakout year from Zion McCollum. And look, when we talk about the combine, it's relevant right now because the workouts are starting today. Zion McCollum was right there with Tariq Woolen with that legend. Woolen had the legendary workout, and Zion McCollum was like 1B to his 1A as far as the size, the movement skills, the cone, the 40. I mean, Zion McCollum is a classic athletic, year 3 breakout type, and that's what he did this past year. So feel pretty good about the cornerback spot with Zion McCollum and Jamel Dean, but you can certainly add a little bit more depth at that position
I
as well.
mean, just those two guys as two data points. I mean, they were two not very good college cornerbacks, right? And each one of them was an athletic freak show. Like they were like two of the top 10 most athletic cornerbacks that have ever entered the draft, neither one of whom had exceptional college tape or production or performance. And both of whom right now look like pretty good NFL players. Reek Woolen hit the ground running. It was amazing right out of the gate. McCollum took a little bit more time to get going, but like in a world of like, what do all these things mean, right? What does on-field production at the college level mean? What does athleticism mean? What does the combine mean? Or any of it. These are two guys from the same draft class who a lot of things would have said, don't touch those guys. But the absurd athleticism said, let's take a chance on that. And both guys right now look like they're becoming good players.
Yeah, so look, like I said earlier, there's not like a ton of major needs for the Bucs. I think you're trying to look at places where they could upgrade. I think tight end could be a spot. Cade Otton's done some pretty good things, and the Bucs don't have a ton of cap space, but could they be a team that might want to bring in division rival Jawan Johnson, who's been a pretty good pass catching tight end, or a Mike Gesicki? You know, that potentially upgrades the receiving core a little bit, but I don't think they're breaking the bank for any free agents with a little over $5 million of cap space at the moment.
Gasecki would be a really fun option for a few teams. Like if the more of the big names we expect Cincinnati to finally have to pony up money and keep around, like the less likely it seems that they're going to try and keep a guy like Mike Gesicki just because he's going to require some form of, modest, moderate veteran money as opposed to let's draft a guy and get him for absolute pennies on the dollar. So I think Gesicki has shown that he's a really good receiving tight end. If you need a guy for whom blocking is not a big concern in your offense, bring this guy in. He absolutely turbocharges that kind of big slot move tight end type of position. And, Baker Mayfield can absolutely use a guy like that.
Including, as we've mentioned a few times, the deep tight end draft. So, I mean, if you're trying to line up places the Bucs could add either depth or have needs, the pass rusher, guard, tight end, I think it matches up pretty well with where they're drafting, where the depth is in this draft. Only 6 picks at the moment, I think, for Tampa Bay. So fill some of those spots, draft the best players at those areas, and feeling pretty good about where the Bucs are.
Yeah.
Anything else for Tampa Bay here? I mean, there's like the bigger picture question of, is this iteration good enough to go win a championship, right? And I don't know that they are. I don't know. I mean, most teams aren't good enough to go win a championship, but you're trying to put yourself in position to at least go on a run. I mean, you can at least say that for the Bucs. They can compete for the division once again. Obviously, they've won it a couple times with Baker Mayfield, and then can they go on a run? And I don't see them knocking off maybe the Eagles or the Lions or who knows, the Commanders at this point, but they're going to be competitive again next year.
Yeah, I mean, whether or not they're going to bring back Levante David for yet one more 1-year deal and keep him in the building, and he's still playing amazingly well. I mean, Levante David is still a top half linebacker in today's NFL despite his age. Whether or not you're bringing him back, you need to start thinking about a life post Levante David, a linebacker. I mean, he would basically be the one high-end player you're comfortable with in that linebacking group. And that's assuming you do bring him back. If you don't bring him back, you basically need to replace an entire linebacker core this offseason. So off-the-ball linebacker is definitely an area where they could be involved. I've seen them linked to Jihad Campbell from Alabama quite a lot at that first-round spot, that number 19 pick. But if you don't take him in the first round, if you go offensive line or defensive line in the first, you can come back second or third round and try and get a linebacker lower on.
I like it, man. I think we've given some options here for the Bucs. They're fixed. We fixed the Bucs.
Nailed it.
We're going to win the division once again. All right, let's go to the Atlanta Falcons here. Falcons coming off a year where they were in contention for the division. Kirk Cousins ended up getting benched, and then it was Michael Penix Jr. taking over at quarterback. Falcons, finishing second in the division, almost made that run, and man, they made the most fascinating decision of the offseason last year. We love talking about these. We love the offseason time. Nobody gave us more fodder than the Falcons because they signed Kirk Cousins to the big free agent contract and then still drafted Michael Penix Jr. I mean, I had to reset my initial analysis on Kirk Cousins was great. You signed Kirk Cousins. Now you don't have to draft a QB at 8. You don't have to worry about the quarterback position, Falcons. It's great. All these QBs are going to go off the board. Just grab the best non-quarterback you can at 8. This is easy. And then they go get Michael Penix Jr. And I also defended that move to the end because I thought it was aggressive outside the box thinking and solving the quarterback position. And now in hindsight, it's like, man, it does look like the Penix move was right. The only thing you would reconsider is the initial signing of Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I think funny when you sort of, if you went back and replayed everyone, I think we had some of the least hysterical reactions to that whole Michael Penix Jr. draft pick versus anybody else out there, which has aged quite well given the way that whole thing has panned out. I do think that doesn't mean that everything they did was perfectly sound process. I think you can raise some questions about how did it not occur to you that Kirk Cousins might be this far gone, right? That would be the question that I would bring up essentially. It's one thing to sign him, but they gave him a lot of money. I mean, Kirk Cousins' contract is significant. Now, it's not as painful because Michael Penix Jr.'s contract is not particularly significant. So you can eat both of them, but it's not optimal, right? Like you would be looking at this and saying that made a ton of sense if you were projecting like 2 years of starting Kirk Cousins and then we transition to Michael Penix in the Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers type of way. If you were told like, okay, but Penix is going to be starting before the end of this season, well, then you would be like, well, then that's then the Cousins contract is terrible. So that would be, I think, a valid question and a valid criticism is like, you didn't build any kind of out into that. It didn't seem to occur to you that he might be this far gone or this badly physically diminished. So it's not like it was perfect process, but the Michael Penix Jr. part of it, which is, I don't care that the rest of you guys think this guy is a fringe first round player or an early second round guy. We think he's worth a top 10 draft pick, even though we just signed a free agent to a good contract. That part so far, albeit very small sample size, looks dead on. I mean, they had the confidence in their own evaluation of the guy, and he certainly flashed and looked extremely talented in the last few weeks of the season.
Yeah, and my big take on it was essentially you could look at the investment in its totality and say, as long as you come away with finding the quarterback, that's good. And yes, you lose a little bit of the rookie contract advantage because of what you have to pay Kirk Cousins, presumably in dead money. Again, by like the time you record this, who knows? Cousins could be, a trade worked out or released or whatever it might be, but I assume he's not going to be back. So you could say either the totality of the investment was worth it. We found our Michael Penix Jr. We found our next guy, or just the fact that it doesn't matter how you find a quarterback. You have to do it, right? I mean, we sat here on this show yesterday, pulling our hair out, trying to figure out what the Steelers should do. And I suggested draft 2 quarterbacks, post round 1. You be crazy aggressive in finding that next guy, because at the end of the day, you have to find the next guy. So process wise, again, not perfect, but at the end of the day, they got a guy that they feel like they could build around. So that's where they are. And offensively, I don't think they need much. I mean, the only real starter we're talking about is center Drew Dahlman, who we've said, hey, that's one of the better centers on the market as far as free agency goes. If they could potentially bring him back, of course, that would be great. That keeps essentially the starting offense intact. And a lot of the 2 deep, right? You're talking about they've got the 2 running backs. They feel good about Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod as their starting receivers. There's probably some questions about Kyle Pitts heading into, the year 4 and what he is, and if there's actually trade value maybe for Kyle Pitts or someone else might want to unlock him. So maybe you need a tight end, but they've got 4 draft picks in Atlanta, and I feel like they're going to the defensive side of the ball where they had issues. They couldn't rush the passer, and several starters hitting free agency as well.
Yeah, don't worry about Kyle Pitts. It's the offseason, which means it's Kyle Pitts propaganda season. Like, we don't worry about Kyle Pitts till we actually get to the regular season and he starts disappointing every week. The offseason's all about Kyle Pitts is amazing. It's breakout season, baby. It's, Michael Penix is the guy that's going to unlock Kyle Pitts. We're not going to be thinking about him as a weakness until we get to September again. Their biggest problem is, remember, a year ago, draft time, I don't think you would have found a more common pairing, outside of like number 1 overall, than Dallas Turner to the Atlanta Falcons, right? The Falcons were going to get their pick of the top edge rusher available. This was the worst pass rush in football, and they were going to get their pick of the best defender, the best pass rusher in the draft. And Dallas Turner was most people's edge number one. And they eschewed that to go and draft Michael Penix Jr., which was part of why everyone was so shocked. It's like this team is crying out for pass rush. All the pass rush was sitting there, and instead they go for backup QB that everyone thought was a second-round pick. It's terrible. But like that's what they left on the table. And okay, they tried to like patch that back up later in the draft by just like throwing volume on the defensive line. And maybe Braylon Trice, coming back this year, basically didn't play last year, got injured. Rook Ororo, Brandon Dorless. These were 3 picks that came out of that draft that they were like, we left Dallas Turner on the table. Let's go get all of these guys to try and figure it out. None of them really made much of an impact year one. Maybe Trice will be the guy.
They were all hurt. Yeah, they were all hurt.
But maybe Trice in particular will be the guy that provides some of that year two. But like, again, you can't rely on that. Like, this is still a team crying out for impact pass rushers. So I would imagine that's where their first pick has to go.
Yeah, and fit-wise, I know I've said James Pierce for pretty much everybody, but when we were talking about Dallas Turner as a fit for Raheem Morris and the Falcons, we talked a lot about how Raheem Morris uses his edges a lot like Brian Flores, where they're going to drop into coverage, kind of old school 3-4 types of principles. And look, I'm not drafting an edge rusher for his coverage versatility. I want him to rush the passer and, set a hard edge first in the run game. But Jalen Walker for Georgia, when you talk about the type of versatility that he brings to the table, the 3-4 outside linebacker, classic type of player that can drop into coverage and add some versatility. I do like that fit for what Raheem Morris and the Atlanta defense has done historically. I mean, they were trying to scheme it up with Caden Ellis, their inside linebacker, some of the sim pressures and trying to free him up on blitzes just to create any kind of pressure last year. That could be a nice pairing with what Caden Ellis brings to the table, Jalen Walker, some of the versatility and the ability to, kind of manufacture some of that pass rush. I love that as a potential fit for the Falcons.
Jalen Walker, I think, would be an amazing fit for this defense. I don't know if he makes it this far. I mean, we're seeing mocks where he's getting taken by Carolina regularly in the top 10. So, he might be long gone by this point. But if Jalen Walker did make it to the Atlanta Falcons, I think that would be a run it into the podium type of selection.
Let me dream. Jalen Walker. So first round pick, like I said, they've got 4 picks. They have, from a draft capital value standpoint, it's the lowest in the NFL. Picks 15, 46, and then 116 and 243 for Atlanta. That, I mean, doesn't sound like much. I mean, it's 4 picks. So you can't address every need with that, but I'm thinking defense probably with those first couple picks. And that's not just in the front 7. They have issues in the secondary as well.
Let's say Jalen Walker is available. I mean, we said Minnesota's basically in the same boat, right? In terms of 4 draft picks, not very much draft capital. And we're like, because they pick much lower because they actually had that good season. They're down the back end of the first round. We're like, ideally, they want to be picking, 10, 15 spots lower down and pick up some extra draft picks. If Jalen Walker is available, though, at 15, do you pass him up to try and accumulate more draft picks? Or do you just take the guy that you think is a phenomenal fit in this defense?
I still would trade down. I think player fit is more fun than it is valuable. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's a fun discussion to say, I would love to see this player in that scheme because I think they would use him to the best of his ability. But that's not enough for me to say that's the best play. That's the best move. Like, I've said a lot. I think fit's overrated. So I'd love to see it. But if I'm the Falcons, I think there's just too many needs on the defensive side of the ball. If you could pick up another pick or two, I would try to do that.
I think my mind on this philosophically is changing over the last couple of years. I would have been in your boat and say, look, just trade down, maximize the percentages, get as many lottery tickets as you can get. And I don't think it's fit that's changing my mind, but I think the higher up the draft you get, the more the other side of that ledger becomes debatable because it's not about the fit, it's about the quality of player I think that you think you're getting. So if you think that Jalen Walker is a blue chip prospect in this draft, right, which is a kind of, amorphous term that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but like if you think that he's genuinely a special talent, which also happens to fit perfectly within your defensive scheme, I think you can make the argument that nailing this guy, like getting one of the blue chips in the way that, the Texans did with Will Anderson and the Vikings think or hope they have with Dallas Turner, like getting that guy is more valuable than maximizing the sort of like the generic by the boxes numbers that the trade chart would say you're better off doing this time. Like getting the specific player that you believe has special talent is worth that.
Now, that part I buy into. If it's the right player, if the evaluation's strong enough, you know what I'm saying? If it's the right guy, you do it. I don't know if Jalen Walker's necessarily that guy. Love him as a player, love him as a fit. I don't know if he's that guy. So
this
anyway.
is like the Michael Penix Jr. thing, right? Like you would be saying, if now the consensus may have been way higher than that, but like the consensus board had Michael Penix Jr. way further down than that. And you're saying, look, if you just because you love a guy doesn't like that shouldn't necessarily you have to factor in that you're on an island with this, right? But ultimately it's more important of getting it right than it is, playing what everyone else thinks. So if you think Jalen Walker is your guy, maybe they like somebody else. But if you think Jalen Walker is your guy and he's available at 15 and somebody's offering you a trade to go down to, 29, that'll get you another couple of draft picks, but you miss out on him and you got to start looking around for the second tier of pass rushers, I'm taking Jalen Walker.
Yeah, I mean, that's all fine. I'm all good with that. I think as a general strategy with the Falcons, would love to see them accumulate more picks. I'll say that for every team that goes in with 2, 3, 4, 5 picks, whatever it might be.
But this
try
is
to get
the
more
one.
If you
this
can.
is the chip, right? Like that's where that becomes slightly tricky for Minnesota, particularly where they're drafting. The history says, the data says, the difference between picking in the mid to late 20s and 39, 40 is negligible. The difference can be, I think, more significant when you're talking about this is a first half of the first round draft pick, and that's your big bargaining chip if you want more picks. Otherwise, use this one.
Yeah. The other places to take a look at, I thought process-wise, bringing in Justin Simmons, late last year as a starting safety was good from a process perspective, didn't necessarily pay off. Mike Hughes had a pretty nice season as cornerback 2 opposite A.J. Terrell. Those are other potential needs on the roster here. So need a corner. I thought they needed a corner last year at this time, and Hughes filled in pretty well, especially for a team that didn't have much pass rush, and the starting safety position. And so both need to be addressed. And so that could be some place to dabble in free agency with some of those top corners that we're talking about, the DJ Reeds of the world, and seeing if, getting a nice starting corner opposite AJ Terrell can help shore up that defense.
I think they could also use a big body inside. I mean, Eddie Goldman came back for them. This is a team that could use, independent of pass rush, independent of edge rushers, they could use a big body nose tackle from somewhere.
Or an undersized nose tackle type like Puna Ford, right? My Puna Ford, Levi Onwuzurike, your second tier of free agency for the interior defensive line. I like that group. BJ Hill maybe fits the bill if we're just talking free agents here.
To be fair, Puna Ford's got a pretty big body. It's just unconventionally distributed. I mean, Puna Ford is my height and outweighs me by about 140 pounds. So
stout.
It's a pretty big body.
Stout. I need some Puna Ford versus Willie Lampkin reps. Those are the types of, right? Those reps. Also draft Willie Lampkin. Actually, draft Willie Lampkin as your center. There we go.
Yeah.
Now we're talking. Willie.
Where is he on the consensus board?
160s or something like that.
What?
Let me send. All right. Let me just send him. We're going to do this live on
159.
air.
159.
Willie Lampkin.
Frankly, that's insulting. That's an insulting position for Willie to be. He didn't get an invite to the combine because the combine hates short people. This is discrimination. That's what we're dealing with here.
Where is he right now? Did you look it up?
159 on the consensus board.
Oh, I was close. Yeah, I think I saw it earlier today. So, yeah, that's messed up. I just told our friend, maybe that's your new center. Maybe that's your guy.
Mm-hmm.
See what I can't, reveal the answer, but we'll see. We'll see what he says.
Send him the picture of me and him standing next to each other. See if that helps or hurts his case.
We'll say pass. We're not spending one of our 4 picks on this guy that doesn't fit the profile.
This guy at Sam's height. I'm not drafting that.
Anyway, I mean, look, if Penix looked good down the stretch, right? I think he had some misses, but made some big time throws. Overall, I'd say far more positive than negative for Michael Penix Jr. I think they have a chance to be very explosive with Drake London, Darnell Mooney, the two running backs, a pretty good offensive line in year 2 in the system. It's going to be coming down to this defense. So we gave the Falcons all sorts of defensive options here to help the team. And then, part of it is all of last year's draft picks. They knew they needed D-line help, as you said. Braylon Trice, Ruka Rororo, Brandon Dorless, getting a full year out of those guys presumably should help the depth and maybe get this thing back on track.
And by the way, I'm not joking about draft Lampkin as your new center. I mean, if they
I'm not either.
If they got Jalen Walker in the first round, right, didn't trade down, used 15 to get Jalen Walker, 46, you get a corner or you get, something else in there. And then with your 4th round draft pick, 117, which would be overdrafting Lampkin based off his consensus board. But like with a 4th round draft pick, if you were able to snag a guy who, with the greatest leverage advantage of any center in the league, is able to come in and be your starting center, I mean, dude, that's a steal.
It's not that they're running all zone scheme. He moves well. Aaron Brewer has held his own as a center for the Titans and the Dolphins. It's a similar type of size disadvantage. And dude, Lampkin is very good at just blocking people. That's what he does.
Remember, freak show. Like he's got a 6'6" wingspan. Like he's got like a body that's been crafted to be a leverage cheat code. He's 5'11", but he has a 6'6" wingspan. So you can't just like beat him for length because he's actually freaky long, but he's automatically 6 inches lower than the guy he's trying to block. Like it's perfect.
All right, man. Do we fix the Falcons?
Yeah.
Jalen Walker, Willie Lampkin. Unstoppable. We got this.
And we're taking whatever deal is available to get Kirk Cousins out of the building because nobody wants that guy.
I mean, that's one place.
Shoulder.
That's one place you're probably getting draft picks. By the way, in our previous shows, I don't think there's any team, QB needy team, where I was like, man, you got to get Kirk Cousins. May have even forgotten Daniel Jones as a potential option for like the Steelers and the Browns. But, those moves still potentially have to happen here as well.
I believe Jones to the Steelers was something that's been mentioned somewhere. I think based off the year Cousins just had, nobody's looking at him as a starter anymore. Not unless like absent desperation.
To me, it's got to be a dome team. It's got to be, controlled situation as much as possible. Anyway, let's get to the New Orleans Saints. Before we do, though, be sure to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. Check the mic. Hit the thumbs up and the bell. Make sure you get alerted every time we go live here. Appreciate all of our viewers, listeners, and subscribers here. New Orleans Saints. What a time for the Saints. Kellen Moore coming in as the new head coach. Brandon Staley as defensive coordinator. And for the first time in a long time, well, one thing's familiar, one thing's unfamiliar. Here's the familiar part. As we head into the new league year, the Saints are last in cap space, and it's red, right? It's negative. They're a negative, a lot of negative cap space. But for the first time in a while, you're starting to see GM Mickey Loomis with an eye toward the future, right? It made sense for a while when Drew Brees was your quarterback. You kept pushing the credit card, maxing that thing out and saying the bill will come due sometime close to 2030. But here we are, and I think it's a reset year for the New Orleans Saints. Also, for the first time, the last time they drafted more than 7 times in a draft, more than the allotted 7, was 2015. And several of those drafts were 4 players, 5 players, a lot of just 7 players. For the first time, they actually have more than 7 draft picks in about 10 years. So it's a different time, I think, for the Saints, and a good time for them not to completely think about 2026. Maybe there's a little competitive rebuild here, but man, I hope most of their decisions are toward the future and not just trying to put a team together for 2025.
Yeah, I mean, it's the time to reset. Like, you can kind of trace all of the cap woes kind of back to the last few years of Drew Brees and the realization or awareness within the building that, like, let's try and get Drew one more. This is our guy. This is one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. Let's try and get one more championship while we have this guy, and then we'll deal with the future in the future. And they did that. They didn't get it done, but it was a fair enough approach, I think, to those things. But eventually you suffer the consequences of some of that. They tried to sort of bridge that, not bridge. They tried to like just go as far as they could with Derek Carr as a quarterback. It's like, that's good enough to maybe win you a division. Actually, it turns out it wasn't, because it took them too long to get going. And then last year you dealt with a ton of injuries as well, and it just wasn't going to work out. So now you're basically full reset. You've gone a different direction. You're bringing in a new head coach. Brandon Staley, I think, is actually a really intriguing retread as a defensive coordinator. I mean, the last time we saw him just focusing on one side of the ball, he was running the number one defense in the game, albeit with Aaron Donald. But running a scheme that's still like at the cutting edge. I mean, Vic Fangio's defense is the same shell, effectively the same family tree. That just wrecked the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. I mean, that was running the number one defense in the league this year. So I think it's entirely plausible that Staley could get that group cooking if they get him some personnel. But now you've got this is a team that could really use having a good draft now.
Yes, I mean that's it. I mean they need to draft better. They did have this stretch. I think if you looked at their drafts from like 2010 through 20 or 21 or whatever, they may have been the best drafting team in the NFL as far as just hit rates and finding the best players. That's kind of tapered off a little bit these last couple of years, and then it coincides with not drafting often, right? Having those drafts where there's only 4 players coming in or 5 players coming in. So we talk a lot about rebuilding years and everything. Like I think you can do the competitive rebuild deal here, because when they brought Derek Carr in, I was fine with that. You're talking about a weak NFC South. And so, Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins coming in as a starting quarterback in the NFC South feels better than adding them to, say, the AFC North, right? When you have to compete with the Ravens, the Bengals, and teams that have, clear superior talent at quarterback. So I think the Saints, like if Carr was playing pretty well last year and, he can go on those runs and those stretches, like they might stay competitive. I just want the rest of those decisions to be, let's build through the draft. Let's not make, crazy decisions in free agency, and let's build to the future. I think you can almost do both. And the Saints might actually, again, if they keep Carr and don't move on from him, set up in this competitive rebuild world. I would set that part up with drafting another quarterback, right? So they drafted Spencer Rattler last year. Love it, right? Take shots on Spencer Rattler. Got him in the 5th, way later than people expected. Draft another one of these, the 3rd, 4th, 5th QB off the board, whoever it is. Draft another one to hopefully stumble in to the heir apparent while you still have Derek Carr on the roster.
Yeah, well, that would be my question first and foremost. If we are fixing the Saints, is there any purpose to keeping Derek Carr other than he does make you a lot more competitive than Spencer Rattler does as your quarterback? To me, Derek Carr is emblematic of the cap trouble that we need to fix on the roster. Like if we're doing this properly and rebuilding, we need to clear that contract off the books. And to be honest, they can clear a ton of space if they cut him with a post June 1st designation. It's a lot more painful if they cut him and I don't even know if they can do that because of how far over the cap they are. But if we're fixing this, and we're getting rid of that contract.
Most of the cap savings would be next year, but there's a lot of dead money attached to Derek Carr. That's why I'm saying I'd almost rather just keep him. And kind of like remember when Bryce Young got benched and you said, hey, I can't even evaluate the rest of the Panthers roster because the QB play is so bad. Like, Derek Carr helps you evaluate the rest of your roster, but you just let him be the guy that's under center while you're, bringing in all the youth movement.
He does, but he also chews up $51 million of your cap this year if you keep him around.
No, I get it. I understand. I'm not in tank mode though for the Saints. I don't know if that's the best way to go, because that would be suggesting, it's getting out of, cap hell, but are you going to roll with Rattler as the starter, or are you just going to draft someone else? Or are you going to go Daniel Jones? I mean, are you going to go bridge quarterback somewhere? Like Justin Fields is going to come in at $5 million.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm getting rid of Derek Carr, I'm definitely looking around for a bridge or something to compete with Spencer Rattler, because I wouldn't want to. I don't think you can go into the season saying Spencer Rattler's our guy based off what we saw from him last season, which is unfortunate for him because Sam Howell kind of ruined that as a possibility for low round drafted quarterbacks for a long time. I think those guys do not get more than a look if you get a chance in the NFL, you either are a Dak Prescott, where like basically immediately the second you
It
get in the
clicks.
building,
Yeah.
yeah, like the second you get in the building, everyone's like, oh, this guy's actually, we missed. He's just way better than everyone thought he was. So you're either that guy, or you get like a look because the situation's not good. A guy gets hurt and you end up getting a few games to start. If you don't look good in those few games, like unquestionably good, there's no way they're gonna gamble that you're gonna be better next year. Like and the Washington did with Sam Howell. They're like, this guy looked pretty good. Let's give him a shot for a year. And it wasn't good. So that's like never happening again for a long period of time. I think, Spencer Rattler for a year would be interesting to watch, but I don't think there's any shot of that happening. So if you're not doing that, you got to go find a bridge, whether it's, Daniel Jones is not a bad shout, but something like that, and then draft a guy too. And now your QB room is Spencer Rattler, Daniel Jones / alternative bridge quarterback, and a rookie of some description.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't think we're winning a Super Bowl with Derek Carr or Daniel Jones. You made a face. You made a face.
I mean, it's just a bold call.
Most important for me is maximizing all these draft picks. So that's where my focus is going to be. I'm going to spend at least one on a QB. You got pick 9, another team that could use help in the trenches. I mean, right tackle. They drafted Talise Fawanga in the first round last year, moved him to left tackle. Right tackle is Trevor Penning. So you can draft another tackle if you need to. Tackle the guard. You've been playing this game where if Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks is there, they could be a guard first, maybe a tackle. They could be both. They're probably in the market for that, and they're in the market for all of those freak edge rushers that are going to be available in the first round.
As a quarterback option, by the way, you do also have the player that Skip Bayless believes is better than Dak Prescott available this free agent period.
Dude, Cooper Rush can win the NFC South. What's his career record? He's got a better career record than Derek Carr. Win-loss record, I bet.
I mean, the data speaks for itself.
Somebody fact check me on that. Harry, can you fact check me on Cooper Rush's record? All right. What else do we want to do draft wise? I mean, it's just draft the best players available, man. They've got the corner need as well. I think there's corners to be had maybe in the second round with Paulson Adebo coming off the bad injury and heading to free agency. Defensive line starters and depth needed in part because they've missed, man. They've missed on Brian. Look, I know Brian Brzee has a lot of sacks. He still struggles against the run. Doesn't create consistent pressure like some others. Maybe he'll get better, but Brzee, Isaiah Foskey, some of those other high-round draft picks, like they got to go back to that well on the defensive line.
That defensive line, I think, needs a real significant amount of work to it. You've got, Carl Granderson is a good player. Cameron Jordan is still going, but has declined hugely from the point where he was a real impact defensive lineman. So, like, you've got, at this point, Granderson's the only player out there that's like consistently moving the needle in a positive direction. Brzee makes some plays, but he also makes a ton of plays on the negative side. Cameron Jordan just isn't the player that he used to be. All the other guys, Colin Saunders has made some plays, including that interception. But again, it's not like an impact defensive lineman. Chase Young, who did some solid work last year, but is a free agent. Peyton Turner never worked out. Isaiah Foskey hasn't done it yet. Like, there's Nathan Shepard was a letdown throughout his career. This is not a good group. And they really, I can throw bodies at it both in free agency and the draft if they can find them.
Yeah. So that's definitely one of my first orders of business here is reshaping the defensive line. Then you got to look at receiver, right? Chris Olave, he's dealt with all those concussions, but he's the best option, obviously. And Rashid Shaheed is, the best wide receiver in the NFL when he's healthy. We all know that. But yeah, they could use another dependable pass catcher there as well. So I think that second, third tier of wide receivers, there's probably pluck one of those guys, at least in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think their first round pick almost has to go on the defensive line. The Olave thing makes that a very difficult sort of position group to evaluate for them because, yeah, he's dealt with multiple concussions now that have kept him out for a significant period of time. Is that something that when we were at the Super Bowl, we went on this sort of medical tour of the building with Dr. Alan Sills, the NFL's kind of chief medical guy. They were talking about the procedures and the concussion stuff and what the whole setup was at the Super Bowl. Like, one of the things I think that's difficult to figure out is like, is an NFL offseason enough to kind of fully reset players that have had issues with concussions? Because a difference between the NFL and a lot of other sports is the downtime in football is a lot longer. A guy like you talked about Jaquan Brisker for the Bears, or Chris Olave, or obviously Tua was the biggest example at quarterback. But like, these guys, you can deal with multiple concussions within a season that can suddenly start to go, this is keeping them out for a lot longer than we expected. But in a sport like rugby, you're constantly going. Like, the season is most of the year. And you have to manufacture a break. You have to say, no, we're like shutting you down for the rest of the season. Whereas in the NFL, once you reach the offseason, particularly if you didn't make the playoffs, you get to January, and now you don't need to be going again until August, right? Like, that's 6-7 months of downtime where you don't have to, expose your brain to those kind of hits. Is that enough to like reset a guy like Olave and say, okay, concussions are in the past now, we just had a rough season of this? Or is this going to be a lingering problem for him? And now he falls under the category of guys that you love when he's on the field, but you can't rely on because he's got an extensive concussion history.
I'm thinking it's probably a concern. It's a concern. Like, I'd love to pair someone with him, but I think you have to think about depth even more because of that at receiver. So I think drafting a couple of receivers makes a lot of sense here for the Saints. So defensive line, couple receivers, offensive line, they need it all. 9 draft picks, first time since 2015 with more than 7. So different. It should hopefully be. Hopefully they're not trading up like they used to. Like, change your ways, Saints. Right. If I'm running the show here, I might turn 9 into 12. You know me, we'll turn it into 12 picks, and it's going to be one of the youngest rosters in the NFL next year, completely changing this whole thing. So that's how we're doing it.
I like it.
Did we solve them? We gave them some options.
Well, they're tough because they don't have money to spend in free agency. They're not. You can't go around and go, well, let's add these 3 players to
cut the credit card. You cut up the credit card. You can't even do it. Oh, but Amari Cooper's out there. Stephon Diggs is still. No, you can't even. No, the card's cut. Can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not as bleak as it looks right now. They'll always be able to restructure, clear some space. They'll get under the cap, obviously, and they'll probably have enough room to get a couple of low-level, mid-level players come in free agency. So it's not like, I don't imagine a world where they're not going to do anything. They're just going to sit in their hands in free agency and not even dabble. I'm sure they'll bring in a couple of players, but it's tough because you're dealing with like low-level contracts, I think, with the amount they're going to be spending. And it really should be the focus on the draft, and let's maximize, the largest number of picks we've had in a while.
All right, man. I think we solved the Saints here, giving them some options. Let's wrap up the NFC South with the Carolina Panthers. It was interesting. After 2 weeks, we thought we might be talking about them needing another quarterback, but hey, they at least have Bryce Young with the way he played down the stretch. I think the attention turns to the defense, certainly one of the worst pass rushes in the entire NFL last year. They've got pick number 8. They've already been linked to every single defensive lineman in this draft who's capable of going in the top 10. There's probably a discussion about Tetero McMillan as a pass catcher for Bryce Young, because on paper, the pass catchers aren't great for the Panthers, but that does feel like the big priority this offseason, rushing the passer, probably stopping the run too, and then weapons for Bryce Young.
Yeah, I mean, that defense was atrocious last year. So outside of a couple of random games where they decided to show up and be way better than they had any reason to be. But I think the first kind of philosophical question for them as a building this offseason is, are we focusing on, now that we've somehow gotten Bryce Young back on track and we're seeing Alabama Bryce Young as opposed to the guy that was struggling for the first year in a couple of games, is our strategy now to try and maximize the return of what we're getting from Bryce Young and try and, surround him with as many receiving weapons as possible? And because the line is good, are we trying to get the best version of Bryce Young we can possibly get? Or do we look at this and say, well, that moved the needle more than anything else we can do already, so now let's really attack the biggest weakness, which is the defense?
I think you have to build the entire team. I feel like we do have these debates every year, and where do you spend your draft capital? You got to build the best team, and the defense. I mean, they showed flashes at times, and had some good little stretches here and there. But bottom line was they struggled up front. They had Derek Brown hurt very
Yeah.
early last season, so he'll come back. But they need some sort of juice off the edge. I think that was pretty clear. Outside of a couple games, it was almost negligible as far as the pass rush goes. And I think again, draft wise, it's a good spot to get somebody. It's a good spot to get somebody at 8. It's a good spot to trade down to 15 and still get somebody. So I think they've got some options to really replenish on the defensive line. So this is the 29th straight team. I've said replenish the defensive line, do it in the draft. I do think the discussion about the receivers is a good one, right? I mean, last year we said, look, you can pick 3 potential elite prospects in Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. But there's a drop-off between that. There's depth, but there's a drop-off, theoretically, between the next tier of guys. Is there a drop-off between the Teterow and McMillans of the world? Just McMillan, maybe? Is there a drop-off between him and, I don't know, Jalen Royals in the second? I don't know that there is this year. So I think there's a great opportunity here for the Panthers to, get one of those pass rushers early and then come back later in the draft, still be able to pick up some potential weapons here for Bryce Young.
Yeah, but then the other question is also like, okay, this receiving core might be okay. Like Adam Thielen had a resurgence. Jalen Coker looks like an absolute find, an undrafted guy they've stumbled onto. Xavier Legette, their first round draft pick, has not shown anything really yet. But you're looking at this roster and you're saying like, there's no number one wide receiver there right now. Now maybe, I mean, Legette is supposed to be that guy eventually, but has shown very little sign of being that so far. So if you believe, again, this is all down to like individual draft evals, right? Talked about it with the Falcons, or whether they think Jalen Walker is that guy. Like if Carolina thinks that Teterow McMillan is that alpha number one wide receiver, do you pass on that because the next guy on most consensus boards is Luther Burden, and he's not really that kind of guy? And you might not have, it's a big step potentially from that to other guys. Do you pass on that, who could immediately be your number one wide receiver? Now suddenly a receiving core with McMillan, with Jalen Coker as a number 2, with Adam Thielen as your third guy, that starts to look really, really good. But you're passing up the impact edge rusher, right? Or do you say, we'll make it work with receiver? Look, Bryce Young was already balling with this group last year. We still have faith that Legette is going to be the guy. Let's take the best defensive player because the defensive side is a mess, and know that we're potentially passing up the one like number one guy that's in the draft.
I think part of that depends on what happens in free agency, right? I mean, you have on the defensive front, you have Derek Brown, Jadeveon Clowney is back, but next to Derek Brown is Shai Tuttle, who now has a total of 7 pressures across the last 2 seasons as a starter. 2 seasons with 7 pressures. So it depends on where they are in the free agent market, right? They're probably going to play in the Milton Williams, Osa Odighizuwa type of sweepstakes, so to speak. So I think it depends on what happens there. If they can, if they pick up a Josh Sweat, a Milton Williams, a Odighizuwa, if they get one of those guys early, the McMillan thing is tempting. Like it is tempting. I'm all about flood the field with 4 playmakers and good luck trying to cover it. And plus they have good group of backs with Chuba Hubbard and hopefully Jonathan Brooks coming back healthy at some point in life. So yeah, I'm about that conversation, but as of right now, it does feel like the draft is shaping up for them to get the defensive line help that they need.
I don't want to turn this too negative, right? But the Shai Tuttle thing, there are players that might only get a handful of pressures, and it's okay because they're like 360 pounds and all they do is play run defense and stuff the run and don't really feature on passing downs. That's not Tuttle. Like, number one, he's not that type of player. Number two,
what he's supposed to be. That's what he's supposed to be, but he's not great at that either.
That's what I'm saying. Number two, he's been bad against the run. Number one, he's like a 300 pounder as opposed to like a 350 pound 2-gapping run stuffing nose tackle that just occupy space. I mean, not good.
No, that's what I'm saying. They need interior defensive line help. They need edge rush help. They lose their starting corner. They picked up Mike Jackson late right before training camp. He did a nice job. I've paired Mike Jackson with some other teams as a nice little potential buy low, maybe ascending in his career. But so they need a starting corner and 2 starting safeties. So look, it wasn't a great roster the last couple of years, and they've got some work to do. And I think a lot of that work is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe you play a little second wave of wide receiver free agency, or Darius Slayton as a deep threat who we've liked to pair with some people. But I think a lot of the work is going to be on the defensive side of the ball here for the Panthers.
Remember when they made the trade up to go get Bryce Young, they gave up a lot to make it happen. And it was like, look, it's the kind of balancing act with that kind of move. It's great on the one hand to be aggressive and go get your guy, but you also have to bear in mind what you're giving up to make that happen. And DJ Moore was the most obvious sort of example of what you're giving up, but they also gave up draft picks. So they didn't have much to kind of repopulate the roster. But this year they've got a lot of draft picks. Like, they've done a good job of getting back on the positive side of that ledger. So they're going to have a lot of swings. They've got 2 picks in the 4th round, 3 in the 5th round. They can add a lot of players in the draft this year.
Yeah, the second rounder that they got from the Rams too is because the Rams loved Braden Fisk and essentially gave up 2 second rounders for Fisk. Right. Used one and gave up this year. So that was a good move by the Panthers to replenish the 2 that they gave up for one of the picks they gave up in the Bryce Young deal. So yeah, I think they're in a good spot to reset things. I think doubling up at edge and interior defensive line in the draft makes sense. Playing in free agency with some of those top edges or interior defensive linemen also makes sense. And I'd keep my eyes peeled for the receivers. I mean, we haven't mentioned, as far as receivers go, we have not mentioned Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, or Nuke Hopkins as options for a lot of teams. You were on record saying you would have, tried to pair Nuke Hopkins with Bryce maybe last year, heading into last year as an option just to help his development or whatever it might be.
Was it last year or was it 2 years ago I wanted to do that?
Probably would have been 2 years ago when he was a rookie. Sorry, 2 years ago. Would you play that game? Cooper's Diggs is coming off the injury, and out of the 3, I think Diggs still looks like the best player, but he's kind of run himself out of Buffalo, and Cooper didn't look great. Hopkins I thought would produce more with Mahomes and the Chiefs, and he didn't. Would you grab one of those former number ones and see if they're going to help as well?
I mean, look, it always depends on what the contract looks like. Like, I'd at least find out what the deal looks like. Cooper would be interesting because this is another team, a little bit like Buffalo, where everybody on it is not necessarily an X wide receiver that can win one-on-one on the outside. That's still theoretically the area where Cooper can do that, just inconsistently at this point. So I would be intrigued in what Amari Cooper would look like in this group. I think he would definitely add something to the group. I'm not sure Hopkins brings you anything that's not already there. I'm not sure Stephon Diggs does coming off that injury. Maybe, like, if he looks amazing coming back off that injury, fair enough. You're also dealing with Stephon Diggs brings some baggage with him that might not be a beneficial thing to bring into this building. I mean, Buffalo voluntarily got rid of the only guy on the roster that could be that X receiver, because even though he'd made a difference in a positive direction for them, because they were just sort of sick of it, right? Houston immediately reworked his contract to ensure that he would only be there for 1 year. They were not going to entertain keeping him around for any longer than that. So I'm not sure I'd be falling over myself to bring him into the building for that alone. Cooper I'd be interested in. The other guy, we haven't mentioned him, I don't think, yet in this sort of whole free agent discussion saga. But he's not. He's a receiver, but he's a very unusual one. But he's maybe the best return man in the game. Kevontae Turpin is a free agent. Like, number one, you add the best return man in the game to the roster, and number two, there's a gimmick role and there's definitely a gimmick role and a deep threat role that Kevontae Turpin can bring to a team.
I like that. I'll buy that for Carolina. Turpin, draft defensive lineman, multiple. We'll figure out corner at some point here. Second wave of safeties, the usual there. Kind of let that thing play out and then fill in your safety spots. Corner is the only other place that I would have some concerns getting that, long-term starter, say opposite J.C. Horn. The one thing we didn't do is give the Panthers Ashton Genty at number 8. I forgot that was the obligation. If you had, imagine Ashton Genty, Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, and Jonathan Brooks. How do you stop that offense?
How do you stop it? Who's stopping this offense?
Who's stopping this offense? All right, did we fix the Panthers?
Yeah, pretty much.
There we go. We'll talk about Stephon Diggs a little bit more here as we get to the AFC South. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for the notifications, hit the thumbs up, do all the things. Let's wrap it up. The last division, Sam. We're 7 out of 8 divisions done. Let's wrap it up with the AFC South. How hard could it be? Houston Texans are up first. Little turnover on the offensive coaching staff. Nick Caley's coming in to call the plays. Our friend Bobby Slowick is out. But it was a rough year up front for the Houston Texans. Offensive line, I think performance, preparation. They weren't handling stunts, twists. They weren't blocking anybody. It just wasn't good. And that feels like the number one priority this offseason, reshaping that offensive line and or just making sure that schematically they are sound and ready to go to maximize CJ Stroud's ability, the pass catcher's ability. And, they've got some pretty good talent on that side of the ball overall.
Yeah, whatever the reason for the offensive line's performance last season, they need to get it fixed this offseason. And there are people out there that blame Bobby Slowick for that. There are people out there that blame the personnel for that. Whatever it is, that's the thing that needs to be fixed. Now, if it was the coaching, they've already gone some way to fixing that by making the change at offensive coordinator. If you think it's personnel, we've still got work to do because a lot of that personnel looks the same right now. So I agree. I think the offensive line was by far the biggest problem on this team last year, and definitely should be priority one this offseason to get turned around.
My stuff's failing me. My technology's failing me, so I can't see everything here. So, yeah, I think...
hate to see it.
I know. You do hate to see it. Let me find get my iPad here going here. Where else do you want to start with Houston? By the way, like the Stephon Diggs thing, I don't want to say I've completely written him off, but, he did some pretty good things in Houston before the injury. I don't know if he was going to be a massive difference maker, but would you try to bring Diggs back, especially coming off the injury? Maybe try to get him cheap? Because I love the move at the time. If you're Houston, you had Nico Collins, who started looking like a star, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs. I love that trio. Good luck. Try to cover it. Dalton Schultz. Good luck. Just never played out like that. But would you try to run it back with a cheap 1-year deal for Diggs?
So this is the thing, right? It's if you could get him on a 1-year deal, maybe. But remember, they specifically reworked his contract to ensure that they could have had him for next year without touching his contract. If they just kept the deal that they traded for him on, he would still be on the team next year. But instead, they specifically reworked it to ensure that he would hit free agency this offseason because of the baggage that he was kind of bringing with him. So if you could convince him to come back on a 1-year deal and then hit free agency again, or just basically no more security than that, cool. But if he's going to want like a 2 or 3 year deal from somebody, I think you've already indicated you don't want any part of that.
I would take a look at it for the 1 year. Beyond that, I mean, they've tried to address some of the offensive line. They had to reshuffle. They brought in Jarrett Patterson, Juice Scruggs over the last couple of years to play center, play guard, move those guys around. Blake Fisher was a 2nd-round tackle last year. He kind of struggled when he had to get in there as a rookie. Like I don't think they're done trying to sort out that offensive line just from a personnel standpoint, even though theoretically they have 5+ starters back, or at least 6 or 7 guys with starting experience.
Well, that's the thing, right? So part of the problem last year is that the line was reshuffled like every couple of weeks. Like they never locked in, this is the 5 we want, and they're going to be there every single week. Injuries were forcing constant reshuffles, which I'm sure didn't help the whole situation. So that's part of the problem. And then, you have the kind of evaluation part, which is they brought in a lot of, like, Laramie Tunsil is great at left tackle. Shaq Mason at one point has been a top tier right guard. He didn't play that way. You former 1st-round picks, like Kenyon Green, hasn't played at that level at all. He's played his way to the bench. Then you've got that duo of effectively centers that have been swapping over and playing guard and stuff, Juice Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson. Like, how good are each one of those guys? Are they 2 starters? Are they 1 starter? And then Blake Fisher, the 2nd-round pick from a year ago. These are 4 or 5 young players that I don't know if any of those guys are actually going to end up being high level or even above average starters for you going forward. At the very minimum, 2 of the starting spots resting in the hands of those guys are kind of question marks until you figure out how good they're going to be. And that's part of the issue. So you've got a right guard who you thought was really good and now might not be. A left guard situation, which is just up in the air. Maybe that's Titus Howard, who was a former right tackle, moved into left guard to try and fix it. It's just the whole thing is still very up in the air. Like nothing is locked down other than your left tackle, who's great.
And Fisher at right tackle, Blake Fisher, he could be good as he was developmental second round type. So I think they got to go back to that well and throw more bodies at it because, again, it's another one of those rosters where I don't think there's a ton of glaring short-term needs, immediate needs across the roster. There's a lot of players with starting experience coming back. You still want to upgrade spots. You want to add depth. They're one of the few teams. Yeah, do you want to add depth on the defensive line like everyone else does? But they're in really good shape there with their 1-2 punch at the on the edge, in particular with Will Anderson and Donnell Hunter. I think it's offensive line, and in the late first round, that could be a spot where the Texans, potentially grab a starting guard. I don't know if you want to use another first-round pick on a guard like you did with Kenyon Green a couple of years ago. So I think it's a tricky spot other than throw some bodies at that on the offensive line, throw some bodies at it. The other thing you can do is go to free agency and pay for some more known commodities so you're not just hoping for the development like they have with so many players.
Yeah, and I think because because there's so many young bodies that haven't necessarily proved anything, I think they want some certainty and some assurance of veterans. You can definitely do free agency. The problem is, again, I think the best spot for free agency is actually left tackle, but that's the one spot they're great at, right? The other element is potential cut candidates, right? A guy like Jack Conklin from Cleveland might end up getting released. If you could pounce on a Jack Conklin, who's definitely not, he's not what he used to be, which is one of the better right tackles in the NFL. But even now, if you can keep him healthy, like Jack Conklin's definitely a solid starting right tackle for you. So if you could get a Jack Conklin on the cheap after he gets released, if that happens, that's a great move.
I like that. To Jack Conklin, push Blake Fisher back to the backup spot. Also haven't mentioned him in a while, so we got to bring him back up. If you need a starting right tackle, Sam, there is always the great Morgan Moses. We could always bring him in at right tackle or the cut candidate, Jack Conklin. I do like that as well. Bump Fisher back to the developmental role and swing tackle. I think that's a good option there. I don't think they're going to – they get the two options at center. I don't think they change much there. And then it's right guard. Maybe it's a Tyler Booker in the first round if he's available at 25, and then the right tackle situation that we just mentioned. And this thing looks a lot better already. And all the while, they still have all these young guys kind of bumped back into backup roles, and they could still develop and become longer-term options.
And I do wonder, Mekhi Becton was a guy who had struggled at tackle, had a great season for the Eagles at guard. Part of that was just staying healthy. But, are there teams out there that still view him as a tackle? Would Mekhi Becton be an option for somebody at right tackle as opposed to just a guard now that he's had his good season at guard? Also a guard. Mekhi Becton is theoretically an option for multiple spots along this offensive line.
Where else are you looking here if you're the Texans? Because again, when you just look at the depth chart, it's hey, a lot of starters coming back. I think they're strong in a lot of the right places. They have two good starting corners, really three good starters in the secondary, including Jalen Petrie. They've got their two starting safeties. They're pretty good on the defensive line. They could stand to use one of those big bodied run stoppers, I would say, a defensive tackle. But there's not a lot of acute needs here. And man, it's a great job by Nick Caserio to get to this point as general manager, where years ago we were criticizing him 3-4 years ago for not adding any impact players, and 3-4 years later you're looking at this team that outside of the offensive line, you're feeling pretty good about the depth here.
Yeah, I do think you want to add receiver help. Nico Collins is phenomenal as a number one. Tank Dell looks really good, but is now coming off back-to-back significant injuries. That one in particular this time looked pretty horrific. So at this point, we don't know what he's going to be coming back off that. So I think you definitely want some depth at receiver. John Mechie, Robert Woods, these are guys that are not at the level you need them to be if you need to rely on them as your number two, number three receivers, any like Robert Woods anymore, and Mechie maybe never. I think you definitely want to be diving into the free agent group, whether it's free agent or diving into the wide receiver group, whether it's free agency or the draft as well.
Technically don't have a ton of cap space, but you're still living in this rookie contract window with CJ Stroud. So I think there's some flexibility here with Houston. They took advantage of that last year with the Danielle Hunter move, bringing him in, and Stephon Diggs. They started to take advantage of those opportunities, having the first contract for CJ Stroud. So I think they have the ability to be aggressive where needed as far as free agency goes. What about I would love to see another good route runner at receiver. Your guy Jalen Royals from Utah State, maybe as a second, third round selection, depending on where he's available to complement Tank Dell and Nico Collins. And then with Tank Dell, I don't know, injured 2 straight years. Are we worried about his durability? Maybe is receiver a bigger need than we really considered?
I mean, I'm less worried about his durability and more worried about that specific injury that he had this year. Like that's the kind of injury I think that can change the career, like can change the trajectory of a player. Now, hopefully it doesn't. I mean, I love Tank Dell. I think he looks like a fantastic player. But if you're the Texans looking at that, you're like, we can't guarantee that this guy's going to be the same coming back off that injury. So at the very minimum, we need to try and upgrade wide receiver 2 so that if he isn't the same, it's less of a problem.
And then I mentioned the need maybe for the big body defensive tackle. This could be the Deion Walker type of play here. Deion Walker, I don't love him for everyone. The Kentucky 360-pounder. We'll see what he weighs in here today, or what his actual weight and movement skills look like. He's a developmental player for me because there's great reps and there's bad reps. I might be able to live with that on a deep defensive line like this, where maybe he doesn't have to be dependent upon right away. So I kind of like that maybe for Houston versus some other teams, the Deion Walker, second, third round type of developmental play.
I don't even know if you need necessarily a big body defensive tackle, but I think you definitely want something on the inside that can push the pocket, because at the moment you've got those 2 edge rushers that are amazing as a duo. Will Anderson on one side, Danielle Hunter on the other side. You've got some depth there as well, but you don't really have a threat that's pushing the pocket in the middle. And that if you had that as well, all of a sudden you've got like nowhere to go for a quarterback, right? You've got threats coming off either edge and you've got a pocket collapsing up the middle. Now you're just in trouble. If the pocket's not collapsing up the middle, you've at least got somewhere to step into. You can try and maintain the semblance of a pocket and you can get rid of the football before the edge rushers can get home. I think this Texans defensive front would go from really good to like utterly destructive if they were able to find some kind of interior force that could move the needle as well.
How about Jaron Reed in free agency? Been a pretty dependable interior pass rusher. Had a nice season last year for Seattle, rushing the quarterback. He's a potential option to add to the mix here. So let's do that. Plus, they fired Bobby, so it's all going to be good in Houston. It's all solved and fixed.
Wow.
That's what the people say. I love Bobby. He's still fine. He's still good. He's going to help Miami. Pass game coordinator. Is that it on the Texans? Did we solve them? Did we fix them? I mean, I think the bottom line, by the way, the bottom line fixing them is Nick Caley coming in and fixing CJ Stroud. I think whether it was Bobby or the reported rift between Bobby and Stroud, whatever it was. I mean, Stroud regressed last year. His production regressed. The offense regressed. Everything got worse last year. But after year 1, Stroud had one of the better rookie years of the last 15 seasons, right? As far as his ability to make plays in the pocket, then start making plays outside of structure. He looked great. It looked like a future star as a rookie. If Caley can get him back to what he just did as a rookie in 2023, a lot of this, they're in good position, right? The Texans, they've been a Final Four team in the AFC over the last 2 years, right? They could easily be back there and then competing for AFC championships if they get Stroud back on track.
Yeah, and where they're picking in the draft, is it 25? Like, that's in the range of a lot of offensive line help as well. We've been focusing on free agency, but like that's in the Gray Zabel world, the Tyler Booker world, maybe Josh Simmons, maybe Josh Connolly, the Oregon offensive tackle. Like that's in that kind of ballpark for all of those guys. So I think you can definitely add a starting offensive lineman with that first round draft pick.
Texans, fixed, solved. We got it. Let's go. Indianapolis Colts here. Interesting season for the Colts, right? Benched Anthony Richardson, brought him back. He's back as the starting quarterback. I think there's questions how much is this the last chance for Anthony Richardson to prove that he's the guy? There's some questions around that. Shane Steichen's back. Chris Ballard's back. Like, they kind of rolled them all back out there for the most part. New defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo. That was the only real change in Indianapolis, was the defensive side of the ball here. So where do you start here for the Indianapolis Colts heading into year 3 of Anthony Richardson at starting quarterback?
Well, I guess my first question would be, do we still have faith in Anthony Richardson? I mean, number one, they've benched him, so that's not a huge sign of faith. Number two, they have said things like, he hasn't shown he can play 17 games yet, right? Which is both accurate and fair. But all that leads you to suggest that you're not necessarily rolling into the season with Anthony Richardson as the unquestioned starter, right? Now, is this a competition with Joe Flacco, or are we going to try and find some more players to come in and threaten the quarterback position?
My suggestion is Anthony Richardson's the starter. I mean, he's shown flashes of that upside, and now it's like, all right, how do we lean into this as best we can, use the run game, but also try to keep him healthy? How do we balance that? Still have to play that game. I'm drafting another QB though. Later, I'm drafting the second, drafting from the depth pieces at quarterback. I'm going to bring someone in, and it's easy. It's going to look like he's a backup. He will be a backup, but got to take those chances, and again, hope that you stumble into someone. So I think with one of their 7 draft picks, one of them, I'm good with taking one of these QBs here just to add some depth to the room.
But Anthony Richardson, you're going to want for every mid-round quarterback team.
Dylan Gabriel for dome teams, yes. Dylan Gabriel to the Saints, to the Colts.
Yeah. Why don't you want to play an outside?
Short. He's got a pretty good arm. I don't know if it's great. Good arm.
Did you not see him breaking miles per hour records according to Zebra Technologies at the Senior Bowl?
Stop. He did have the
miles per hour.
He did have the best miles per hour and RPMs at the Senior Bowl. Maybe I'm underrating Dylan Gabriel's arm because he's short. But yeah, Dylan. So we're going to draft Dylan Gabriel for the Colts.
This is now a concerning pattern of behavior that I've both recognized and I need to highlight from you. You have demonstrated consistent prejudice against us short people.
That's not true. I mean, I was the leader. I was leading the Baker Mayfield bandwagon as the shortest number one overall.
You see, this is the thing, right? You're basically just like a woman, right? If it's above 6 foot, you're okay. Below 6 feet is where you start to have problems, right? If the guy has a 5 in front of his his height,
I took Bryce. I said Bryce Young, number 1 overall over CJ Stroud. I said I had Bryce Young.
That's true. That's your one. That's the one you got away from. But otherwise, I think it's a concerning pattern of behavior that you are basically discriminatory against people who are sub 6 foot.
I was a big Tim Lincecum fan back in the day. He was way too short to be a starting pitcher. I knew he'd be a future Cy Young Award winner for the Giants. He was my teammate. He was our bat boy one time for a minor league game. Anyway, what else we doing here for the Colts? 2 starting offensive linemen, free agents, and really more than that, losing some of the depth with Ryan Kelly, Mark Gawinski, Will Fries, all going to be all free agents. So need some help on that defensive line. They're picking at pick 14 because they don't really have a good starting tight end. They're also mocked as like the Tyler Warren destination. And what?
They keep drafting like athletic freak show tight ends. How do they still not have one?
Maybe that's not the way to do it. They're not really athletic freak shows. They're just big. Mo Alley Cox and Jelani Woods, they're just big.
I mean, Mo Alley Cox might be just big, but Jelani Woods was a freak show. Will Mallory was certainly an athletic freak show.
Get Will Mallory some more reps.
Damn right. They demand the ball.
Is this like the 10th straight year? You know how like for 10 straight years you describe the Eagles and it's like D-line, very good. O-line, very good. If they win on the perimeter, they're Super Bowl champs. 10 straight years of that. 10 straight years of the Colts being like, roster looks pretty good. Pretty good. Not a ton of holes. Got cap space. Got the normal allotment of draft picks. Pretty good roster. That's been the Chris Ballard era so far.
Well, yeah, I feel like Chris Ballard is like GM Mike Tomlin. It's like, we're good, but we're not great ever.
Yeah.
Like we're consistently pretty good, and most of the moves we make are pretty solid, but like not enough. Like not enough to actually go where it's got to go. And I feel like similarly, the sort of patience is wearing a little bit thin for him. Like, at some point this has got to get better than just solid, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as they're another team that could be in the defensive line world. I know they got Latu last year in the first round, but Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam, some of their depth is heading toward the end of their run there. Again, not an acute need, but I think it matches with the value here. It's the new scheme. So they're going from, that traditional Gus Bradley cover 3, cover 1 scheme, where I do feel like, I don't know if this was Gus Bradley or if this was Chris Ballard. I felt like they underinvested in corner over the last couple of years. When they invested, it was, the Ballard way. It was big, long corners. It was the old school Seattle, right? Like, let's get the guys who are 6'1", they're long, they're athletic. Juju Brents, Jalen Jones. They've been okay, but it does feel like maybe that's a position that they could do a better job of. And I think they could be in the market for, if Will Johnson's there at 14, all of those first-round corners I think could be in the mix there for the Colts.
But also that point you made, I think, is pretty key. Like this group was tailor-made for that system. Like their personnel was 100% focused on that specific skill set, which is it's not universal. Like, those guys do not necessarily thrive in every single defensive scheme. So I wonder how much turnover they're going to need on the defensive side of the ball because they've moved away from Gus Bradley's defense.
Yeah, so there could be more work than expected, right? If they do want to get a different style corner in there, if they should trade for Jermaine Pratt because he wants to be traded and he's a good, dependable linebacker that you could put in there and knows the system. So just get that done. There's a starter there to replace EJ Speed. Yeah, there might be more work to be done on the defense than maybe we thought.
Like, it's not like, Cincinnati's group wasn't exactly playing out of their minds, but like you look at the body types and, general measurables of the Colts defensive backs versus the Bengals defensive backs from last year, and they do not share an awful lot of similarities.
Yeah. So I think D-line depth, I would look at the cornerback group. I don't know where Will Johnson ends up going. He's in the top 10 on the consensus board, but, he's another one coming off of injury. I think he'd be a really nice fit there. I don't want to draft a center or a guard in the first round, but you could try to bring Ryan Kelly back, in free agency, but they do need a starting center, starting guard, and some backups there. So I think at least a couple of those draft picks in particular need to go to the line. And as always, the Colts usually have some cap space to play with. They've never really gone crazy in free agency. Remember, there were years where they had $100 million of space and $60 million of space. They never go nuts, but they could always be players in free agency.
Yeah, and when you've got multiple spots in the offensive line, I think you should probably always be picking up at least one of them in free agency. I like the idea of bringing Ryan Kelly back. Like, unless his market is going to be crazy, and I don't think it will be based off recent history for him, I would try and keep him in the building. That there's a high level of play there to be had, particularly with that group. So I would definitely be trying to snag him and get him back if you could.
Maybe a Patrick McCarry come in, fill back up 3 different spots, play some guard. They could also be, when you're trying to fill multiple starting offensive line spots, that's where the Brandon Scherfs and Kevin Zeitlers of the world at that point in their career, when maybe they're the 1-year stopgap, you should at least entertain that. So I would at least try to tackle one of those spots, either with Kelly coming back or a guard spot in free agency, so you don't go into the draft with one of those major needs.
This will be a team, deep tight end draft, as we said, but this is an awesome landing spot, I think, for Elijah Arroyo, the Miami tight end.
Ooh, I like
another
that.
Miami tight end. Pair him with Will Mallory. It's Miami tight ends.
I'll do the Savion Williams thing too. I think I did it with the Ravens, but anytime you have the the running mobile quarterback like an Anthony Richardson, I say, well, what if you had Savion Williams and his running back skills and his size, and he's an athletic freak that kind of fits the way the Colts, the way they work things here. Savion Williams, Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, messing with defenses with all those guys in the backfield. How about that as a potential fit here?
Yeah, I like it.
Developmental receiver. That's the only thing. He is very Cordero Patterson like, where like the nuance and intricacies of receiver play are lacking, like to the point where I'm fearful that the route running will cost multiple interceptions in a given season, much like Patterson. But you have to offset that with some freak plays either after the catch or coming out of the backfield.
And you already have one of those guys who can't get on the same page with his quarterback in A.D. Mitchell. So maybe that's not the best thing to be adding to this group. Arroyo, though, I like his route running as a tight end is pretty savvy, but he made Bruce Feldman's list of like freaks that's expected to absolutely cook at the combine. You know, like the numbers that are being talked about for Arroyo are crazy. Like he's expected to run like a wide receiver. I mean, if he's able to put athletic freak numbers in addition to really impressive tape and route running, like this is a guy that missed time with injury, and that was sort of his concern. But like, dude, if he's back healthy and an athletic freak, and you can get him in the third round, I mean, let's go.
It's very intriguing group of pass catchers too. Alec Pierce was averaging over 20 yards per catch as a deep threat. Michael Pittman is your possession type. Josh Downs is developing into one of the better slot receivers in the NFL. And then you have A.D. Mitchell, who's always open. He's just never running the same route that the quarterback expects. It's okay, though, because they'll figure that out at some point. Very intriguing, high upside type of receiving group. Sure, it all comes down to Richardson starting to hit some open throws, be more consistent, but they have some pieces to have an explosive offense. Colts fixed?
Easy.
Perfect. All right, two more teams, man. We got this. Grind it out. We got it. Here we go. Jacksonville Jaguars are next. And we're in an interesting spot here where maybe the pre-record almost, it feels like breaking news to us, and it's week-old news for everyone else. But they've finally announced their new general manager as of right now while we're recording this thing. James Gladstone comes over from I almost said St. Louis, from the Los Angeles Rams. So the GM spot has been filled. They have Liam Cohen coming in as the head coach. Gladstone coming from the Rams. There's a connection there with Liam Cohen. So this is an interesting one, right? Because friends of McVay now is it becoming friends of Les, and we have some Rams tentacles sneaking around the NFL here. And we know if there's one thing the Rams do is they do things differently. And they're bobbing when everyone else is weaving, whether it's never having first round picks or whatever it might be. So I think it's an interesting hire for Jacksonville, and they're not in a terrible place. You have Trevor Lawrence, you have stuff to build around, but it's pretty pivotal time, I think, for the Jags as they're trying to rebuild this roster.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they make a change at head coach. Liam Cohen's the guy coming in there. The big sort of decision, though, I think for them is they finally made that call and got rid of Trent Baalke, who had been the guy clutching all the power for a few years there, and obviously had a very clear way of doing things when it came to personnel moves and talent acquisition. And like he is chasing freak athletes above all else, right? And that's how you end up with a draft pick like Trayvon Walker. Now you're going to go in a different direction. And, you start to look at this team and like, it's not a bad roster top to bottom. Like this is a team that has underachieved. And part of the reason for that is that, the talent is better than the results that it's been producing. So this is a team where I think there are some teams where the new situation, like, all right, this is going to take a while, right? This is not a good in 2025 deal. This is maybe a good in 2026 deal. The Jags could be good this year. Like this could be turned around fast.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to last year, I struggled pegging what the Jags were going to be because the previous year, don't forget, in 2023, they were the number one seed late into the season. They were 8-3. They were competing for the number one seed. Then they collapsed. And the on-field product, or at least the depth chart, and they were pretty good, a pretty good team. And then they overhauled a big chunk of the roster, and then brought it back with like a mishmash of veterans who, on paper, were kind of like similar players. Like it felt like a whole bunch of lateral type moves on both sides of the ball with some of their additions. Gabe Davis came in, and Darnell Savage, and it was just a whole bunch of lateral moves. And it's like I don't know how all these things are going to fit. And then the pieces just didn't fit all that great. And they didn't have a good season. They struggled defensively and inconsistent offensively, and everything was off. But again, it's like if it's a similar group of players right now that doesn't look awful, and sometimes with just a different coach, different coaching staff, different system, it could all work. So I don't hate the Jags. I don't think this is like a complete tear down. I want to see, they need better depth on the defensive side of the ball. There's ways they could upgrade the offensive line, but they brought in a Brian Thomas Jr., who looks like an absolute difference maker. And then to me, it all comes down to Liam Cohen getting the most out of Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the kind of draft pick that can absolutely transform everything about this offense. I mean, and the thing is, not only I didn't love Brian Thomas Jr. as a draft prospect, and it looks like I got that horrifically wrong. But one of the reasons that I didn't love it was because they kind of needed him to be that player if this offense was going to do anything, because they didn't have those difference makers anywhere else. Well, forget it. Like he looks like that guy. He looks like somebody that can have a Jamar Chase kind of impact on an offense, where you look at him and say he's going to change the overall results we're getting, not just from the quarterback, but from everybody else, like from all the receivers that now have way more room to work in because we got to dedicate extra attention towards Brian Thomas Jr. I don't think that there's anything he can't do within that offense. So that has the potential to be an absolute home run draft pick that can change everything. And now you're pairing him, with a guy like Liam Cohen, who's, running an offense that should maximize what Trevor Lawrence is able to produce. He could be the thing that this offense is built around.
Yeah, we thought going into the season, maybe Brian Thomas Jr., he'll make his money as just a deep threat. As you said, he showed he could do it all. But if he was just a deep threat and Gabe Davis was a bit of a deep threat, it felt like this was going to be this aggressive downfield passing attack, which it was. But now we're sitting here, okay, Brian Thomas is a pretty true number one here. Gabe Davis can settle in as the deep threat. Christian Kirk's probably going to get cut, maybe cut by the time you're listening to this. This does feel like a need, and I'm not saying we're going to do it at number 5 overall, but Teterow and McMillan discussions probably should be had. It would be a fascinating combination to have Trevor Lawrence throwing to the big-bodied McMillan and Brian Thomas Jr. If they could get a trade down opportunity, I think that would be a great way to maybe spend night one if you're the Jags. If not, I'm all in on Mason Graham maybe being the guy here for the Jags at 5 with the defensive line depth and pieces that they need, and certainly interior pass rush that they need.
Yeah, given where they're picking, and given that we expect 2 quarterbacks probably to go out of the first 4 picks before Jacksonville come up, I'm pretty interested in staying in that number 5 draft spot and getting the best player available, which is probably going to fill an area of relative need. And it's been Mason Graham in a lot of mock drafts that I've seen. I mean, I would love that as a fit. I think Mason Graham is this absolute game wrecker at defensive tackle, incredibly strong, incredibly fast. The guy's got a wrestling background. You can see that in his tape, the way he just tosses linemen to the side sometimes. Mason Graham comes into this team and you pair him with, Josh Hines Allen, who is a top tier pass rusher. Then you've got something to work with.
If we go that route, I love Mason Graham. Violent block shedder. Love him for the Jags at 5. Later in the draft, I do want to look at receivers, like finding a good route running complement to Brian Thomas Jr. I know I've talked a little bit about Jalen Royals before, big body of Jaden Higgins, Jack Besh, Isaiah Bond. I mean, there's a plethora of those types of receivers that I think would be really nice fits and complements to both Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., especially if Christian Kirk ends up out in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should definitely be targeting receiver with, so this is another thing. They've got a lot of draft picks to play with as well. Yeah. They picked 10 times, I think. Okay, a lot of them are late on, but they've got 2 third-rounders because of the Cam Robinson trade to Minnesota last year.
Five in the top 105 is what they have.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
So,
pretty good spot.
A third-round draft pick on a wide receiver would make a ton of sense.
So I like that, right? We're going to help the defensive line with Graham. We'll get some receivers in there. The O-line, again, interesting because they brought in Mitch Morse last year. They haven't had a ton of starting spots available the last couple of years. A pretty seamless transition with Walker Little going in and filling in for Cam Robinson. He did look good. I remember Mike Renner way back loved him as a developmental left tackle, and Walker Little finally, coming good on that, looking like the future left tackle there, and they just locked him up. I still want to maybe add some pieces. Antoine Harrison getting a little bit better as the former first rounder, starting right tackle. They do need a right guard with Brandon Scherf hitting free agency, so they could use some depth and potential upside options on the offensive line.
Yeah. Again, I think second round might make sense to try and grab a starting offensive lineman. Like if their first 3 rounds were Mason Graham in the first round, potential starting right guard in the second round, wide receiver in the third round somewhere, and then whatever else your best player available is with that other third round pick, maybe some kind of secondary depth somewhere. That's pretty good day 1 and 2.
Their second round pick at pick 36 is intriguing for the corners that I keep saying, could fall. I don't know if 36 is too far for them to fall, but everybody that I said, Buffalo could look at in the first round, those cornerback needy teams, could one of those good corners fall to 36? Could have Mason Graham at 5, really good corner at 36. You're talking about 2 first round caliber players maybe with your first 2 picks.
I think corner is so scheme specific, scheme dependent, and the boards are all over the place that every year we go into this with Cooper DeJean, consensus first round guy, Kool-Aid McKinstry, consensus first round guy that end up falling into the second round because there is no consensus when it comes to cornerback rankings. Because if your scheme is Gus Bradley's, like we talked about it, the difference between Bradley's scheme and Anarumo's scheme, they want totally different corners. Their boards look nothing alike at the same position, let alone, it's hard enough to get people to agree on the same position if if they want the same things, let alone if they want completely different things. So I think corner is the one position where it is it's very realistic to sort of project random players to slide into the second round that you think are consensus first round guys. I think that's less true with some other positions where everyone is pretty much looking for the same thing.
If we're trying to predict what the Jags do from a strategic standpoint, again, James Gladstone comes in as the general manager. He's only 34 years old, but he's been with the Rams for the last 8 years, director of scouting strategy. If we were to define the Rams scouting strategy, they've always drafted in volume. He steps into a situation where the Jags already have their picks. They've drafted in high volume. They had that spurt where they never picked in the first round and they traded for players. I don't know if that's not like the strategy that the Rams always employ, right? They've come back from that. But you do come out of a lot of Rams drafts where it's like, oh, that's a unique group of players, right? I wasn't expecting them to draft, or certain players to go this high or whatever it is. So I am intrigued by that. Not so much reaches or anything, but their own style. We know the Rams have used a lot of on-field athleticism before some other teams were using it. So that I'm intrigued by that as far as the Jags and seeing Les Snead and the Rams, again, their system, so to speak, their scouting system maybe spreading across the league a little bit.
I mean, not just that, but with this whole run of no early picks and all those late round picks, they came out of every draft with a couple of players from those late rounds, which is a terrible strike rate generally, that are big parts of that team. I mean, Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, not just solid, guys chewing up snaps, but legitimate impact players that they got in the 5th round, in the 6th round, guys like that. So if 10 picks here in Jacksonville, if they can tick out, that's why, again, I'm not sure I'd be in a rush to trade down. If you can get a blue chip superstar and make Mason Graham with pick number 5 and your new GM can come in and work a little bit of magic and pick up a couple of guys in the lower rounds that can make useful contributions. Now you've already had a good draft, regardless of what you did in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Yeah, and look, I don't know how good of a job Gladstone's going to do, but for an offseason where the Jags looked like they fumbled the whole thing, right? They fumbled the coaching search and they fired Trent Baalke way later than everybody expected. Might end up being a pretty good outcome. Getting Liam Cohen, who was it looks like one of the better young offensive minds in the NFL. You have him paired with Trevor Lawrence. You have the Rams, front office coming in to reshape things in where the front office had been, a little hit or miss over the last few years, to say the least. So I don't think it's that far off for the Jags, especially if they get Trevor Lawrence on track here.
And that's a big sort of question that hangs over all of this, right, is what can Liam Cohen get out of Trevor Lawrence? I think his trajectory, his potential, what he actually is a lot more up in the air than it's been previously. Like, what is his ceiling actually? I think Liam Cohen is a great person to get an answer to that question.
All right, man. Anything else on the Jags here?
Nope, that's everything I got.
All right, that's 31 out of 32. The final team here. There was once upon a time we forgot the Titans when we were doing these.
Did happen,
which is ironic, given
despite the movie.
We remembered them this time. Team 32 is the Tennessee Titans, and they've got the number 1 overall pick. Mike Bergonzi comes in as the new general manager. They've added some former GMs, Dave Ziegler, Reggie McKenzie, as support staff. They're really beefing up the front office here. I just want to start with that. Chad Brinker is the guy that's in charge, even above Bergonzi. I think he was a part of not pushing Vrabel out, but, Vrabel wasn't a fit with the new front office that was going to be a little bit more analytically driven, change things a little bit from where they were before. So it's kind of a multi-year process for the Titans getting people in place. And Brinker's got this Packers history where they like to draft and develop and not go crazy in free agency. Last couple of years, the Titans were very much half in, half out. A little bit of rebuild, a little bit of Calvin Ridley big deals and L'Jarius Sneed trades. I think we're going to see the Titans not completely punt on free agency, but focus on the draft, trying to draft a ton and building from within.
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of like the approach they've taken so far, but at what point does it become too many cooks? Like, just like we got like 4 or 5 GMs in this building at this stage. Like, how many is too many before we start to have too much input?
You're seeing that a lot around the league. Like when there's a first-time GM, our friend Rick Spielman is now the sounding board with the Jets, and we have multiple sounding boards, right? Multiple sounding boards for the Titans. It's like, what would you do here? What are we going to do? But it's good. It's just the experience, how to handle certain situations. Remember when we had Rick on the show too, and he was like, it's not just like doing what we're doing right now, which is like fixing the depth chart. It's all the other ancillary stuff that GMs have to do. If you could pass off some of that to other people, that's a big help, especially if you're a Bergonzi who's first time in the seat. So kind of like what Tennessee's doing as far as beefing up the front office. They've beefed up the analytics staff over the last couple of years as well.
So the first question for us is, they're another 2 quarterback or not 2 quarterback team. They have the number 1 overall pick in a draft where there are, 2 quarterbacks that most people seem to quite like, but nobody seems to quite like them as much as, say, last year's top quarterback group. The talk out of the building has been sort of like, we might not draft a quarterback at the top of this draft. What would you do?
I think if you ask me right now, I'm going to say just draft Cam Ward, then you go accumulate all your picks and build around them. I don't hate the strategy the other way, but I would rather take the quarterback. I would rather take Cam Ward than dabble in, hey, can we also fix Sam Darnold and pay him $40 million a year? Can we bring Daniel Jones in as a bridge? Like, I don't think I want to play that game when I have the number 1 overall pick. I'm going to take Cam Ward and let's build around him.
What do you think they will do?
I think there's a good chance. Well, here's the other option. There's a good chance they trade out because the groundswell, and we're in Indy right now, Sam. People don't know. We're in Indy right now, and we're hearing the rumblings. We're at Prime 47 at 2 a.m. and the chatter. More chatter is going to come up about the Titans not drafting a quarterback. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're picking someone else at 1. I think it might mean the Giants are trading up, that somebody's trading up to number 1. I would entertain that as well, right? Right now, if I have number 1 pick, I'll take Cam Ward. I would entertain the trade down. Like, you trade to 3 and you grab Travis Hunter, you grab Abdul Carter. I would take a Mason Graham. I don't care. I'll take one of those 3 guys. Give me Hunter, say, and accumulate the picks. And I will play the bridge quarterback game if I know that I could trade down for a massive haul.
Yeah, I mean, you've got that game. If it is the Giants specifically that are wanting to trade up to secure their quarterback, you've also got a world where if your quarterback is different to their quarterback in terms of who you think is the best guy in the draft, there's a world where you trade down to 3, let the Giants pick their guy, your guy is different, and if the Browns pass on a quarterback, you could get your guy that you were going to take at 1 overall anyway having accumulated the extra draft picks that the Giants were willing to get up or give up to jump 2
Yeah,
spots. So
that would
dream
be
scenario.
amazing. Like if they actually loved Shadur,
Right.
and boy, the Shadur comps are all over the place, but there's
Or
somewhere
yeah, or
along.
vice versa. Like if you love Shador and but the Giants love Cam Ward, like either way,
Yeah,
if their name is different to yours,
and you could still get your guy because the Browns, there's a chance they might not
right?
draft a quarterback, right? We're not in the same spot as last year where the Browns, we knew the Browns were drafting a QB. We knew Washington was drafting a QB, and
The
we knew that
Bears,
New England would. What?
the Bears,
Yeah, who did I say?
Browns.
The Browns. We knew the Bears were drafting a QB. We knew Washington was drafting a QB, and we knew the Patriots would draft a QB or trade to someone that would, right? We knew those things were happening. There's not enough noise right now that it's going to go QB. There's not enough. Like there's an assumption because there's needs there, but there's not enough noise. So like even the Browns couldn't, pass on a QB and you trade to 3 and you still have it. So I would
And
entertain all of those options and probably lean toward the trade down over just taking Cam Ward at 1.
And a year ago, we were fairly certain that the consensus was Caleb Williams was the best quarterback available in the draft, and then then it became complicated, right? Then it was Jaden Daniels versus Drake May, but like pretty much everybody was sure that Caleb was going number 1. Now,
Yeah.
it might emerge that like it might become a consensus that Cam Ward is the number 1 guy, but I don't think there's anything like the same level of consensus this year than there was a year ago. In addition to the level seems to be lower generally, right? Like wherever you are in Cam Ward versus Shador, the consensus appears to be that it's a lower level than it was a year ago when we were talking Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels.
Yeah. So in addition to all this, the Titans only have 2 picks in the top 100. They have pick 101, right? So they have 3 in the top 101, but they have pick 1 and pick 35. So they do have a golden opportunity here. When you pick number 1, your big opportunity is to find the next quarterback, of course, or to really add an influx of youth into the roster. I think I would lean that way for the Titans. Now it's an uncomfortable game not knowing who your QB is going forward. It is very uncomfortable, but I might play the whole let's bring in Daniel Jones and try to draft 12 times. And that was what Brinker mentioned. Like let's draft 30 times over 3 years. That's how you build the roster up. That's how the Packers have done it historically. I think that's what Tennessee tries to do. So let's say I would do that. Like, let's say we get the trade. We were fixing the Giants. If I was in the Giants situation, completely different roadmap here, I would trade up for Cam Ward. We kind of did that a few shows ago. I'd be okay trading down with the Titans and accumulating picks. The other thing I would do before anything else is fix the right tackle spot, which has been an absolute disaster, with the great Morgan Moses. Of course, Morgan Moses is coming in. He's fixing the Titans' right tackle spot. That's what's going to happen.
I can see that happening. All right, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to use the PFF mock draft sim right now. I'm going to force a trade with the Giants because apparently they're not interested in going to 1. So I'm making that trade. Cam Ward goes, which means I'm going to snag Shador with 3. That was the player I was going to take anyway. So I'm getting my QB at 3. I've traded down. I've gotten their second-round pick. So now I've got 2. I got 34 and 35 at the top of the second round.
Ooh, I like that. All right, so 34 and 35, the things we could potentially get there, because it doesn't matter what the sim says right now. Interesting spot for the Titans. I think they could still use some offensive line help. The receiving core looked fun a year ago with Nuke Hopkins and Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd, and Hopkins is gone, Boyd is gone, and Ridley feels like a lot of money for still a number 2 type of receiver. So could use some receiver help. And the defense, second fewest yards given up last year in the NFL, I believe it was, and they still gave up like one of the highest points per game. Just a crazy year for Tennessee. So there is some talent on both sides of the ball. I think they need pass rushers. They need guys who can win one-on-ones on the edge. Offensive line and receiver feel like the biggest needs for me.
Yeah, and they've got a decent amount of free agent spending space as well, so they can definitely dip into that free agent market, go looking for linemen in particular. Like, God, yeah, finally, please fix that right tackle spot. It's not that hard to starting right tackle. You've got to be able to do better than, Nicholas Petit-Frere, Jalen Duncan. Like, just go get a right tackle, a real one.
We did it. It's Morgan Moses.
Free agency.
Morgan Moses will bring in Tevin Jenkins to play guard. And then you kind of hope Lloyd Cushenberry, who they spent some money on in free agency, they want he needs to play better than he did in Tennessee. Skoronski heading into year 3 at left guard, kind of disappointed last year. But he played better as a rookie. So like there's potential for this thing to get better. JC Latham, I think, held his own for a guy moving from right tackle to left tackle as a rookie. I expect him to get better. So I think they could be close, but I think you have to probably fill 2 starting spots at right guard and right tackle if you're the Titans.
Right. I will say that, we were speculating heading into last season what kind of impact Bill Callahan, the offensive line coach they acquired along with Brian Callahan, could have. Like, he's one of those guys that you think can move the needle in terms of offensive line improvement, and it didn't happen year 1, certainly. Maybe it's a thing that takes longer than that to make a real impact, but we were expecting maybe Skoronski takes a huge leap forward and looks like a star. J.C. Latham hit the ground running, be good. Maybe that he could rescue Nicholas Petit-Frere or Jalen Duncan, one of these toolsy developmental right tackles, and none of it really happened. So I don't know if that's just not going to be a thing or if the Callahan impact is going to be felt more this year. But yeah, that whole offensive line is still a mess.
All right. Well, we gave some free agent options there. I think the second round receivers could be in a good spot there, especially if we do the trade down that you were talking about. The other thing I mentioned is pass rushers. Arden Key feels more like I love Arden Key as my number 3 pass rusher, not my 1 or a 2. Harold Landry, those 2 guys. I think we need an upgrade there as far as pass rush goes. The other free agent I would take a look at that I've given to a couple other teams is Dre Greenlaw to come in to play linebacker, maybe next to Jack Gibbons there. I think Greenlaw could be one of those culture resetters as well as you're trying to rebuild this thing.
Yeah. Wide receiver might be the tricky spot for this team to land somebody. Like, I wonder if they would dip into the trade market and try and snag a receiver that way. It's hard to find, because this is the team that actually needs a potential number 1 and is not, assuming they're not going to use one at the top of the draft. They're not going to go. Now, maybe maybe we don't draft Shedeur. Maybe we trade back to 3, and are we drafting Travis Hunter, wide receiver 1?
Yes. I mean, that's on the table potentially as well, right? So we're going to punt on QB, and we're going to spend the whole year building the infrastructure. Hunter's our receiver. He'll be a receiver because of our cornerback depth chart here.
All right, how's this for you, right? We trade back from 1 to 3. We take wide receiver 1, Travis Hunter, with pick number 3 overall. We pick up that extra second round pick for the Giants. At the top of the second round, we're drafting Jackson Dart, who we like anyway. Turns out Jackson Dart was our guy the whole way. And we now have extra ammunition to go reinforcing the line or the pass rusher.
I love it. Maybe that's part of the reason why there's rumblings that the Titans aren't going to draft a quarterback.
Big Jackson Dart fans.
Jackson Dart thrown to Travis Hunter and Calvin Ridley. The cornerback room still has a lot of potential with Chidobe Awuzie, L'Jarius Sneed, who kind of struggled in his limited time after being the big coming over in the trade from the Chiefs, but he still has. He's still good. Roger McCreary, like, the defense has a lot of potential there. I want some juice off the edge, just more guys that can rush the passer. And then the fixes that you said, right? That's nice. We fixed the Titans.
Easy.
We'll see what happens coming out of Indy here, because a lot of rumblings that they're not going to take the quarterback, and if they do try to take that number 1 pick and spin it into 10 to 12 picks, a chance to really reshape the roster. But you go in with the same QB question marks maybe next year.
If you were, because Travis Hunter was sort of assigned to the DBs at the combine. If you were him, he's going to do both drills, right? He's going to come back the next day and run wide receiver stuff.
I don't think that matters. I think they just picked one.
I know, but if you were him, you got to do them both, right?
I think we had this, for people that missed it, we had a very good conversation when we talked about Hunter I think during the Patriots breakdown. So to answer your question, yes. Like, the man did, he played both positions full time. The NFL wants to see that. He'll do drills at both positions.
Right.
Absolutely. So I expect that to happen. I think they just have to pick one, though, because we have the schedule. They come in at different times. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know what the logistics look like.
Yeah. No, more importantly, I think they had to call him a DB because they go first.
Yeah, right. So you get, and then he'll probably stick around and do the receiver drills or
Yeah,
whatever. Like,
that's what I'm
so,
saying. So
uh,
like if he was labeled as a wide receiver, he would be a day off. Like the
right.
DBs are doing stuff the day before. Like he'd be a day late to everything. So you have to
Yeah,
call him a DB, send him in with the DBs who are in a day before, do their registration, their medical, their orientation, their interviews, all that shit happens the day before. So if you call him a wide receiver, you've missed all of that.
yeah. So I don't think I wouldn't look too much into what the combine called him from a position standpoint. Just to rehash what we talked about, I think when we said, hey, if the Patriots draft him, what should he be? We've said, like, in an ideal world, I say corner first, receiver second, mix it up, because that's just what makes sense from like a football standpoint. It's the easiest thing to do. But I also said from a depth chart perspective, we said, look, if he's more valuable as a receiver to a certain team, he could play receiver. If he's more valuable as a corner, he could play corner. If the Patriots drafted him, you could easily make the case, well, he's wide receiver one, more valuable there. If the Titans drafted him, similar case, right? He might not start over Chidobe Awuzie and L'Jarius Sneed, and they have Roger McCreary. Not that he wouldn't start, but it's like, we've got a pretty good trio there on paper, but boy, could we use a starting wide receiver. And for Tennessee, he could be wide receiver one and then essentially a backup rotational corner. And I think that makes a ton of sense. And that's a huge part of what makes Travis Hunter so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are two separate questions with Travis Hunter. There's like, what is the best possible, with three really. There's what is the best possible optimization of Travis Hunter's deployment in the NFL to like fully maximize what he could be, right? What is the maximum amount of value we can extract from this unique player that's capable of playing both ways, right? And that obviously involves some way of two-way play, some form of two-way play. And the most likely explanation there is like full-time corner, sub package role on offense, or full-time wide receiver, dime corner, something like that, right? But that's a totally different question to if I just gave you his wide receiver tape, where do you rank him? And if you just looked at his wide receiver tape and came to the conclusion that he's wide receiver one in this draft class, a draft class where you need a wide receiver one, the rest of it doesn't matter to you, right? Maybe it's a bonus and we can figure out how to tap into that down the line. Cool. But like for your purposes, all you care about is I think he's better than Tet McMillan or Luther Burden or anybody else you want to put up there at the top of this draft. That's the only relevant question to them. And then I guess the third question is like from a Hunter personal point of view, like is he better at wide receiver or cornerback? And does he want to play one more than the other because wide receiver gets paid more, et cetera, et cetera. But like a lot of these discussions basically come down to forget all the other crap. Do you think he's the best wide receiver in the draft or not? Because if you do, he's in that discussion with McMillan in the top 10 picks.
I think you also do have to pair that with what he wants to do. And I'm not saying you're at the mercy of what he wants to do, because he might say, I'm gonna play 160 snaps a game. Let's go. I'm gonna
Right.
play 150 snaps. I'm doing it. I don't care what you say. I mean, if he does say that, that is a legitimate, like, hey, I don't know if we could offer you that. I don't think that's a good idea. All right. We want we want to manage your workload, right? We have
I
a
mean,
plan for you, which might not coincide with what your plan is for yourself.
I think that's only sure. His input is interesting and potentially informative, right? But it's only a problem if he's like, I refuse to countenance any other scenario than
No, that's what
X,
I mean.
right?
Yeah, that's what
Like
I
if
mean. You
he,
have to get to the bottom of that. And again, we might hear some of
yeah,
that come out after interviews or whatever happens at the combine here.
like unless I'm sure he's going to tell every single team he would love to play both ways, right? But it's only a problem if whatever team is like, well, we only want to play you at wide receiver, and he's like, I refuse, or I want to play you as a corner only. No, I have to play. Like it's only, you know what I mean? Who knows? But it's only if he's like militant refusal to do anything other than what he wants to do. Does it really matter what he wants, whether it's wide receiver, corner, or two-way player? From a team perspective, again, the only relevant thing is watch his tape, decide what you think. Like, is he wide receiver one at your area of need? Is he cornerback one at your area of need? Or are you actually in the market of a two-way player? Those are the only relevant things. So for Tennessee, New England, I'm only saying I think this guy's the best wide receiver in the draft, and you need a wide receiver one. So go get him.
So we've solved the Titans. We had Jackson Dart thrown to Travis Hunter. Hunter's backing up. L'Jarius Sneed at corner. And Morgan Moses and Tevin Jenkins are protecting Jackson Dart. And I need you to go on with Ramon Foster in Nashville radio and pitch this whole thing. Is there over
Oh,
there?
yeah,
Is
I'm
it
there.
Cam Ward? Is it Shadur? And you're like,
Nah.
wait. We're going to trade down, grab Travis Hunter, Jackson Dart on the turn.
Got it.
Fixed. In almost under 2 hours. Look at that. That's it. We fixed all 32 teams.
Easy.
Don't even have to watch free agency. You don't have to watch the draft. We just told you everything that's going to happen. So anyway, I love this. Love this exercise. It's all fun. We'll revisit as well. We'll be recapping when teams actually make moves and where they are. We'll reset before the draft, but it's off-season time. Love talking about all this stuff, and we appreciate everybody viewing, watching, listening, whatever you're doing. Hit the thumbs up, the bell, and the subscribe button. Do all those things over here on YouTube. We're at the Combine right now, and we're hopefully bringing you some fun behind-the-scenes action for the Scouting Combine. Next time we see you will be another Monday morning. We'll do a little post-Combine mock draft on Mock Draft Monday. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again Monday with more Check the Mic.